The hollow man walks at night. That's what they used to say in the small town of Black Hollow, where shadows stretched too long under the streetlights, and the wind always whispered secrets through the trees. The town sat cradled between two ancient hills, a place where people lived quietly and never asked too many questions, especially about the disappearances. They called it a myth, a bedtime story meant to scare children into staying inside after dark. But everyone knew someone who had vanished, a neighbor, a friend, an old lover. No bodies were ever found, just empty houses, still warm dinners left untouched, and beds that looked as if someone had just stepped out of them. But when Daniel Mercer's little brother Ethan disappeared, the legend became real. The vanishing. Daniel had been babysitting Ethan that night. Their parents were away for the weekend, and at 17, Daniel was more than capable of keeping an eye on his 10-year-old brother. The night had started like any other. Ethan was watching cartoons, snuggled in a blanket on the couch. Daniel was playing on his phone, not really paying attention. Then the power flickered. Just once. The lights dimmed, then brightened again, a small hiccup in the electricity. It happened sometimes in Black Hollow, nothing unusual. But then Ethan spoke. "He's outside." Daniel barely registered it at first. "Huh?" Ethan pointed to the window. The hollow man. Daniel looked up, expecting to see nothing, maybe a swaying tree branch or a neighbor's cat. But Ethan was right. There was someone out there. A figure stood just beyond the glow of the street lamp. Tall, too tall. His body seemed stretched, elongated, wrapped in shadows like a living silhouette. Daniel's stomach tightened. He had heard the stories, of course, but he had never believed them. Then Ethan stood up, walking toward the window like he was being pulled by an invisible thread. "Ethan, get away from there," Daniel said, his voice sharp. But his brother didn't listen. He placed his small hand against the cold glass, staring at the figure. "He wants me to come outside." Daniel's blood ran cold. He grabbed Ethan's arm, yanking him back. "Don't say that." Ethan looked at him, wide-eyed. "You don't hear him?" "Hear what?" Ethan's lips trembled. "He's whispering to me." Then the power went out completely. The dark comes alive. The house was swallowed in blackness. Daniel's phone flashlight cut through the dark, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He tightened his grip on Ethan's hand. "Stay close to me." But Ethan wasn't moving. His breathing was ragged, his little body trembling. Then, slowly, his head turned toward the window. Daniel didn't want to look, but he had to. The hollow man was closer. No longer outside the street lamp's reach, he now stood directly in their yard, his face, or what should have been his face, hidden in a writhing mass of darkness. Long, spindly fingers twitched at his sides, as if eager to grasp something. The front door unlocked. The sound of the deadbolt clicking open sent terror slicing through Daniel's chest. He ran to the door, throwing his weight against it just as it creaked inward. A freezing wind rushed through the gap. "Help me!" Daniel yelled, struggling against the unseen force pushing the door open. "Ethan, help me close it!" But Ethan wasn't behind him anymore. Daniel spun around. His flashlight beam swept across the empty living room. "Ethan?" A whisper crawled through the air. A voice, not his brother's. "Daniel." It came from the hallway. Into the hollow. Heart hammering, Daniel stepped forward, moving carefully, calling his brother's name. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, the walls warping, twisting, becoming unfamiliar. The house no longer felt like home. Then he saw Ethan. He was standing at the end of the hall, staring into the dark void of an open doorway. His hands were limp at his sides, his head tilted slightly, as if listening. "Ethan?" No response. Daniel ran to him, grabbing his shoulder. "Come on, we're leaving." Ethan turned his head slowly, but it wasn't Ethan anymore. His face was pale, hollow. His eyes were black pits, endless and empty. His lips stretched too wide in a grotesque smile. "The hollow man took me," he whispered, "and now he'll take you too." Daniel staggered backward as the darkness in the doorway swelled, spilling into the hall. Tendrils of shadow reached for him, grasping, pulling. The house trembled around him. He turned and ran, sprinting toward the front door, his own ragged breaths the only sound. But the house had changed. The walls bent inward. The door was gone. A shriek erupted behind him, not human, but something raw, guttural. A clawed hand burst from the shadows, wrapping around his ankle, yanking him backward. He clawed at the floor, screaming, but the darkness swallowed him whole. For a moment there was silence. Then Daniel's voice echoed from the void, hollow, lifeless. "Eden, don't be afraid. It doesn't hurt. Forever." The curse spreads. Black Hollow never forgot the Mercer boys. The town changed. The streets grew quieter. The children played indoors long before sunset. But no one could escape the legend. Years later, another child whispered the name. A little girl named Lillian stood at her window one night, staring at the street lamp. She pointed, just as Ethan once had, her tiny voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy, he's outside." Her mother turned, confused. "Who, sweetheart? Huh?" Lillian's lips trembled. "The Hollow Man." The mother dismissed it as a nightmare, but when she woke in the morning, Lillian's bed was empty, her favorite stuffed bear left sitting on the windowsill. The Mercer house remained abandoned, but some say if you press your ear against its walls, you can still hear the faint echoes of a boy's voice, forever trapped in the void. And if you ever find yourself walking alone in Black Hollow, listen closely, because if you hear the whisper, if he calls your name, it's already too late. The Hollow Man walks at night, and he is always hungry.